Someone says something kind to you, and before the warmth of it can even land, you are already deflecting it away. Maybe you laugh a little and say something like, "Oh, it was nothing, really." Maybe you immediately point to someone else who deserves the credit more than you do. Maybe you list the ways the thing they praised was actually flawed or rushed or not as good as it looked. And the person who gave you the compliment watches you do all of this, and something in the exchange goes quietly flat. They meant something. You received it like it was addressed to the wrong person. And then both of you move on, and you probably don't think about it much afterwards. But here's the thing worth sitting with. That deflection was not modesty. It was something older and more complicated than that. And if it happens often enough, if it is a pattern rather than an occasional awkwardness, then it is telling you something real about the gap between how you see yourself and how other people see you. That gap is what this is really about. The pattern itself is easy enough to name. Some people simply cannot receive a compliment without immediately dismantling it. Not because they are being falsely humble or performing politeness, though that is sometimes part of it, but because something in them genuinely struggles to let the good thing in. The kind word bounces off before it can settle, and most of the time, the person doing the deflecting is not fully aware of why they keep doing it. It just feels automatic. It feels like the honest thing to do. Understanding why that happens requires going somewhere a little deeper. So stay with this, because the reason tends to surprise people. A compliment, when it comes toward you, is making a claim about who you are. It is saying, "This thing is true about you. You are talented. You did something well. You are admired." And here is the quiet problem. If your internal sense of yourself does not match that claim, if the version of you that lives inside your own head does not quite recognize the person being described, then the compliment creates a kind of friction. It feels inaccurate. And one of the most natural things in the world is to correct what feels inaccurate. Psychologists sometimes talk about something called self-verification theory. The idea, put simply, is that people have a deep need for their world to be consistent with how they see themselves. Not just when the self-image is positive, even when it is negative. The brain, in a very real sense, finds familiarity more comfortable than uncertainty, even when the familiar thing is an unflattering picture of who you are. So if you have spent years with a quiet belief that you are not particularly impressive, or that your work is just adequate, or that people tend to overestimate you, then a compliment does not feel like a gift. It feels like a small disruption, something that does not quite fit the system. And the easiest way to resolve that disruption is to push the compliment back, reframe it, minimize it, redirect it, until the world feels consistent again. This is not a flaw in character. It is the brain doing what brains do, which is to maintain a stable picture of reality. The problem is that the picture it is maintaining may have been drawn a long time ago by other people in circumstances that had nothing to do with who you actually are now. A lot of people who struggle with this carry an early history of being praised conditionally or not much at all, or in ways that felt unsafe. Perhaps approval in childhood came with strings, or the people around you were quietly uncomfortable with visible pride, or you learned early that putting yourself forward tended to lead to being cut down. The brain records those patterns. And then decades later, when someone offers you genuine warmth, the old recording plays. Make yourself smaller. This is not safe territory. Give it back. Think about how this actually looks in everyday life. Someone tells you that you ran a really good meeting. and you immediately say, "Honestly, the agenda was a mess. I barely held it together." A friend tells you that your home is beautifully warm and welcoming, and you start listing all the things you have been meaning to fix. A colleague says your presentation was genuinely impressive, and you say, "Well, so-and-so really did most of the research." You cannot just say thank you and let it be true. There is also a social dimension to this. Many people, particularly those raised in cultures or families where humility was strongly valued, have genuinely absorbed the idea that accepting a compliment graciously is arrogant, that taking credit for something is showing off, that the proper thing to do is to immediately lower yourself back to the common ground. The intention behind that is not harmful, but over time it creates a reflex that works against you, because it trains you to treat evidence of your own worth as something to be corrected rather than something to be acknowledged. And here is what tends to happen in relationships when this pattern runs long enough. The people who care about you start to hold back, not because they think less of you, but because they have learned that the compliment will not land, that it will be deflected or argued with, and there is something a little wearing about having your warmth handed back to you repeatedly. It is not that the relationship breaks, it is that a small channel of connection stays partially closed. There is something else worth naming here, and it is the difference between deflecting and genuine humility. Real humility is not about believing you are small. It is about having an accurate sense of yourself, including both your strengths and your limits. Someone who is genuinely humble can hear a compliment and say quietly, "Yes, that is true, thank you," without it inflating their ego, because they are not dependent on the praise and they are not threatened by it either. What looks like humility in the deflection pattern is often something closer to self-protection. The reasoning sounds modest, but underneath it is a belief that it is better to shrink yourself before someone else does it for you. So what might help? This is not about forcing yourself to perform confidence you do not feel, or pretending that accepting praise is suddenly easy. It is something gentler than that. One small shift that tends to be useful is simply slowing down the moment. When a compliment arrives, there is usually an impulse to respond immediately, to manage it, to get past the discomfort of it. What if you gave yourself just a breath before you spoke? Not a dramatic pause, just enough space to notice what you are about to do. Because often the deflection is so automatic that it is already happening before you have consciously decided anything. A little space between the compliment and your response gives you the chance to choose differently. And the differently does not have to be big. It does not require you to suddenly agree enthusiastically with everything kind that is said to you. It can be as small as just saying, "Thank you, that means a lot," and then stopping, not adding the but, not listing the caveats, not steering the attention elsewhere. Just letting the thank you be enough. It will feel strange at first, possibly very strange, because you are essentially trying something that goes against a long rehearsed habit. But strange is not the same as wrong. It also helps to become curious about the gap, not to criticize yourself for having it, but to gently notice it. When someone says something kind and you feel the urge to push it away, it is worth asking quietly, where did that come from? What is the belief that this compliment is bumping up against? Because often, when you actually look at the belief, it turns out to be old. It turns out to belong to a version of you that existed under different circumstances with less information, less experience, and less evidence of what you are capable of. You do not have to resolve all of that at once. You just have to be willing to hold the question. One final thing worth sitting with. The people who offer you genuine praise are not doing so carelessly. They noticed something. They chose to say it. When you deflect it entirely, you are not just protecting yourself. You are also, in a small way, dismissing their perception. Letting the compliment land, really letting it in, even for a moment, is not just something you do for yourself. It is also a way of honoring the fact that someone else saw something real in you and decided it was worth saying out loud. And that is worth something. That has always been worth something. If any of what you heard today is sitting with you in a way that goes deeper, please remember that this is general insight about human patterns and tendencies, not a substitute for talking to a professional who can actually know you and your story. New episodes come out every day on this channel. If this one felt like something you needed to hear, the subscribe button is there, quiet and patient, whenever you are ready. Take care of yourself.